Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Well, continuing my discussions of science fiction movies, we're in the 1970s right now. Today I'm going to talk about The Man Who Fell to Earth. Okay, you can kind of see there's many different posters of this film. That's the cover of the Criterion release. So, this is another cult film from the 70s, and what is a cult science fiction film? My understanding, I would define it as a film that was not really recognized at the time when it came out. This movie, the post production was had a lot of issues between the studio and the editors, and a lot of acrimony and many other things. A lot of questions swirling around this film since it came out. But it was not a box office hit by any means. It just came and went and was forgotten, but not totally, because over the years a small audience of devoted fans kept the film going to the point where it started to be referenced in pop culture 20, 30, 40 years later, and it continues to a film maybe a little bit more well known today maybe than when it came out. The fact that it starred David Bowie, who was at the height of his fame when it came out in 1976, helps, and David Bowie's reputation and stature continues to explode or to keep getting bigger, I think, with each decade. And I think Bowie will always be considered one of the key artists of the 20th century, and the fact that this was one of the films that he started will always get people to go back to it and check it out. So in that way, it's a cult film. It's also based on the novel, 1963 novel by Walter Tevis, which I'd read the novel a few years ago, maybe longer, and I'll talk a little bit more about the differences or between the novel and the film briefly, but and Tevis was an interesting writer. Like, he wrote The Queen's Gambit, which was made into a popular Netflix film a few years ago. He wrote stories like The Hustler, the film about the pool sharks, played by Jackie Gleason and Paul Newman. So it comes from an interesting writer and the source material. But we need to talk about the director as well, Nicholas Roeg, who really made the film into his distinct vision, and I'll talk about that. Where Roeg had made films prior to this, like Performance in the late '60s, which was a movie. Mick Jagger was in the movie. It's a movie about rock stars and decadence in the late 1960s. It's like a weird synthesis of a crime film and a rock and roll film. He did Walkabout, which is about two kids who get lost in the Australian outback. Incredible film. He did Don't Look Now, which is a gothic horror film with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, set in Venice, which is another very memorable movie. And Roeg would make some changes. He would make some big changes from the novel, in particular the structure, whereas the novel is very straightforward, linear story, if I can recall. And with the film, Roeg really goes for this non-linear narrative throughout the film, which can make it a confusing experience, especially the first time you watch it. And there's also some digressions throughout the film that I still try to figure out myself, and I think it's stumped a lot of people, some of the creative decisions made in this film. But I think that's what makes it interesting, is what makes it rewatchable. Like, I remember I probably first watched this film 10, 12 years ago. It was back when you could rent movies on Netflix, if you can remember, where they would send the DVD to your mailing address, and you could watch it that way. So that's how I watched it the first time, and I just remember it was a really warm day, watching it in the afternoon, and I have a very distinct memory of watching it, and I've watched it a few times over the years, and I should say it's on Tubi right now, so you can watch it for free with ads. It is available to watch with streaming. So, and this was a movie too that was hard to see, I think, for a lot of years. Where I don't know much about the home video release of this movie, if it ever got. It probably did get a VHS release, but the DVD was hard to come by. So it was a movie that was hard to see, I think, for a long time as well. So anyway, to talk about the story a little bit. So the movie begins with David Bowie playing David Jerome, Thomas Jerome Newton, I'm sorry, is his character's name, who lands on Earth from another planet at the beginning of the story, and we learn throughout the film that he looks human on the surface, but he is sort of covered up his alien appearance through prosthetics and things like that. So, but he looks like a human being. Okay, and clearly casting David Bowie, who I should say as well, I think is a pivotal figure in science fiction. Just I think in the genre in general, with the way Bowie incorporated science fiction themes into his music throughout his long career, and his appearance, the whole Ziggy Stardust persona he used for a while. He's also playing an alien in this film, but it's not Ziggy Stardust. He's kind of, and Bowie, I believe, said in interviews, he's basically playing himself. Is the way he approached playing the character. So, but he does have that very thin, translucent appearance that makes him look alien through the film. We learn that his planet he came from is devoid of water, is having a water crisis, and he has come to Earth where he can hopefully use his technology to bring water back to his planet. And there are some flashbacks with Bowie and his family as he leaves to go to Earth to hopefully come back and save his planet. However, though, he is constantly getting sidetracked from his mission, and that's a big theme in the movie, where a lot of human civilization, the vices of human civilization, tend to distract him and take him away from his purpose of what he's on Earth for in the first place. And even when he lands, and there's just so many mysterious moments in this film. For instance, when he lands, we see a man far away in a suit watching him, so we assume the government is aware of his presence. Well, we later do find that out. They definitely do. So there is a story. There's definitely a story arc through the film where he has a bunch of jewels and things with him where he can sell to make money. And once he acquires money quite quickly, and he is able to gain patents on inventions he's using to try to build up the funds to rebuild his spaceship and go back to his planet for the water. So the supporting cast is interesting as well. Buck Henry plays his lawyer, who helps him kind of lead a secretive life and develop his projects he needs to do. And there's also Rip Torn in here as a scientist who also comes into Thomas's orbit. And we have Candy Clark, who plays his love interest in the film, Mary Lou. And he meets Mary Lou early in the film, and they do form a relationship. And she introduces him. She's like his conduit to Earth culture, where she teaches him about all different things of religion. But she introduces a lot of vices to him as well. For instance, like alcoholism becomes a big theme in this film, where Thomas becomes addicted to alcohol through the course of the movie. And their relationship is interesting. The film spends a lot of time on the intimate side of their relationship as well. Rogue was known for doing some outlandish scenes with graphic nudity and things like that. So we do, which is not a big part of the book. I don't remember right, but Rogue spends a lot of time on that part of their story. And as the relationship starts out, typically kind of sweet and normal, but it gets more and more kind of strange and deranged as the story goes on, including when she sees Thomas in his alien form. She freaks out. So the movie, that isn't a big focus of the movie, the relationship with Thomas and Mary Jane. And anyway, he's developing his projects. He is about ready to go back to his planet, but then he's arrested by the government. And the film kind of takes a different turn, where it becomes this conspiracy type of movie where he is imprisoned by the government, and they start doing a lot of experiments on him in this luxury room they keep him in, almost like he's their test subject that they continually do things to. It is suggested that the government has a number of beings from other planets. It's also experimenting with quite a bit. So here we get the cruelty of humanity, just how the government doesn't really even care if they're doing harm to him or not. So that's in the film as well, which is something we see in a lot of sci-fi, where a being from another planet lands on Earth, and what happens? The government terrorizes the being. So there's also a theme in the film of media saturation, where we see a number of scenes where Thomas is watching like 15, 20 screens at the same time. He's able to take it all in, but he is fascinated with television and media and how it works. And eventually he becomes a musician in his own right. So he's very interested in the arts, the media arts especially of Earth as well, and that's another recurring theme throughout the film. But eventually he escapes his captivity, and another, I mentioned the way time works. Time is very strange in this movie. It seems to move in odd patterns, where it feels like we're always in the mid-1970s, but we see characters age, like Rip Torn and Candy Clark and Buck Henry. They are all aging, getting gray hair, wrinkles, and all that, while Thomas is not aging at all. And yet, we don't really see much changes happening on the Earth as well. So the movie does a lot of odd things with time and things like that. A lot of it is the editing style of Rogue, where he's bending time, and almost as you're watching the film, you get confused and you lose your sense of time, and you start wondering, well, what does time even mean? So that's almost like a Christopher Nolan thing, where he's tried to do in a lot of his movies, but Rogue was really pretty wild with his experimentation with narrative in this movie. Just a lot of strange juxtapositions, and scenes that don't seem to have much to do with each other are kind of put against each other, and things like that too. So right. So eventually, in the final act of the movie, we're with Thomas, and he's all alone now. He's kind of formed this persona, like a film noirish persona. We get the sense that he's a big fan of Humphrey Bogart, so he adopts that type of persona, and that's kind of where the story ends, where we don't think the idea of him going back seems to be long forgotten now, even though he did make one final attempt through his music to communicate with his planets. But that's really where the story goes at the ending. And themes, there's like alienation, obviously a big theme. Just the loneliness is such a big theme throughout this movie, and him being away from his planet, but also feeling alone and isolated here as well. And there's almost this, we're seeing human civilization through his eyes, and a lot of it doesn't look great. We see a lot of surveillance, we see a lot of suspicion, we see a lot of hypocrisy, and things like that. The film isn't necessarily a satire. I could see this movie easily be moving in more of a satire direction, but it doesn't really do that. There is this almost honest tone running through the film that never gets into satire in an interesting way, but also mortality, like the passing of time and how we perceive the passing of time is. It's almost like we're seeing it through Bowie's perspective, where time doesn't really seem to move for him, and yet it's moving for everyone else. That's interesting, and just how distractions, how easy it is to become whatever the big things that we want to do in life, and how just we constantly have distractions coming up, and some of it's our own fault, some of it's no fault of our own. How we can get trapped into vices, and I mentioned how alcoholism is a big theme in the book, and that's a big theme in the novel too, and things like that. So yeah, I mean, so I guess to wrap it up, Man of Fell to Earth is it's an interesting experience. Actually, watching it this time, I found it to be even more confusing watching it this time, I think, than I did. You just kind of have to go with it, I think, where certain characters are introduced, and we'll get scenes with these side characters that don't seem to have much to do with the rest of the story. So you do want, and some of the scenes do go on much longer than you might think. So for modern audiences, especially audiences who don't like science fiction, this would be a tough sell. On the other hand, though, it is a movie that I think pushes the envelope of science fiction, of what you can do on film, where it can be a story that's experimental and plays with time, and you have these strange, interesting characters, and there's commentary about Earth and things like that too. So the music in the film, now there's different accounts of whether Bowie at first was going to do the soundtrack for the film, but he ultimately did not. Although some of the music that appeared on his albums, I think, after this were inspired by this film. But it's an interesting score that we get in the film, and that was, trying to remember who did the music for this. John Phillips, Stumu Yamashita did the music. So there's interesting music throughout, and the set design is really good throughout. A lot of it was filmed in New Mexico, so the alien desert landscapes helped move the story along. I think Bowie is really good in the film. I mean, he plays it as his character as an innocent. There is something very peaceful and kind about his character, and at one point he tells the Rip Torn, when Rip Torn finds out he's an alien, he tells him, "Look, I mean you no harm," and he's completely honest about that. He's not here on Earth to do anything to harm anybody. He just wants to get back. So I think Bowie gives a good, a sympathetic performance for the character in the film. So, and the whole cast is interesting. I think a lot of the performances in this movie are interesting. So, all right. So those are my thoughts on The Man Who Fell to Earth, a complex film from the 1970s. And if you're into science fiction, I would definitely recommend checking it out. So, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.